Elena Rodriguez stepped out of the military transport truck, her boots hitting the dusty ground of Camp Thunder with a soft thud. The scorching Arizona sun beat down on her shoulders as she adjusted her gear bag and looked around at what would be her home for the next 6 months. Advanced Sniper Training School was known throughout the military as one of the toughest programs in existence. Only the best marksmen from every branch of service made it this far. She was the only woman in a class of 32 elite shooters. The moment her feet touched the ground, she could feel the stares. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as hardened soldiers turned to look at the newcomer. Elena had expected this reaction. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, with her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, she looked nothing like the typical sniper candidate. Most of the men around her stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and intimidating presence. "Well, would you look at what the army sent us?" came a voice from her left. Elena turned to see a tall Marine with close-cropped blonde hair and arms like tree trunks. His name tag read, Morrison. Didn't know they were accepting applications from the typing pool. A few chuckles rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Elena said nothing. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only made things worse. Instead, she shouldered her bag and walked toward the barracks building where a sergeant was calling out room assignments. "Rodriguez, Elena. Room 12. The sergeant barked without looking up from his clipboard. As Elena made her way to her assigned quarters, she heard Morrison's voice again, louder this time so she would be sure to hear. $20 says she washes out before the end of week 1. Any takers? You're being generous, Morrison, came another voice. I give her 3 days. This ain't some basic training course. This is sniper school. She's gonna crack the first time she has to carry a full pack on a 20-mile march. Elena kept walking, her face showing no emotion. She had heard variations of these same comments throughout her 8-year military career. They had started the day she first stepped into a recruiting office in her hometown of San Antonio, Texas. The recruiter had actually tried to steer her toward administrative positions, suggesting that combat roles might be too physically demanding for someone of her size. What none of these men knew was that Elena had been shooting since she was 7 years old. Her grandfather, a Vietnam War veteran, had taught her to hunt deer and wild boar in the hill country outside San Antonio. By age 12, she could hit a moving target at 300 yards with an old bolt-action rifle that had belonged to her great-grandfather. By 16, she was winning regional shooting competitions against men twice her age. Her room was sparse but clean. A single bed, a small desk, a locker for her gear. Elena unpacked methodically, placing each item in its designated spot. Organization had always been important to her. In sniper training, it could mean the difference between life and death. That evening, the entire class gathered in the main briefing room for their first meeting with the course instructors. The room fell silent as 3 men in combat fatigues entered. The man in the center was clearly the senior instructor. His name tag read, Colonel Hayes. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hayes began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "Welcome to Advanced Sniper Training School. Over the next 6 months, we will push you beyond your limits. We will break you down and build you back up. Some of you will not make it. In fact, statistically speaking, more than half of you will wash out before graduation." He paused, letting his words sink in. Sniping is not just about shooting. It is about patience, intelligence, physical endurance, and mental toughness. A sniper must be able to remain motionless for hours or even days. You must be able to calculate wind speed, humidity, temperature, and dozens of other variables in seconds. You must be able to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Elena listened intently, taking mental notes. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been seeking. Your training will begin tomorrow at 0500 hours, with a 10-mile run, followed by marksmanship evaluation. Colonel Hayes continued. Those of you who cannot keep up with the physical demands will be removed immediately. Those who cannot shoot accurately will follow shortly after. As the briefing concluded, Elena noticed several of her classmates looking in her direction. She could almost hear their thoughts. How could someone so small possibly keep up with the physical requirements? How could someone who looked like she belonged behind a desk possibly have the skills needed for sniper training? The next morning arrived with the harsh sound of a whistle at exactly 5 o'clock. Elena was already awake, having risen 30 minutes earlier to prepare. She had learned that being ready ahead of schedule was always better than scrambling to catch up. The 10-mile run began in darkness, with only small red lights attached to each runner's gear to mark their position. The pace was punishing from the start. Within the first mile, Elena could hear heavy breathing and complaints from some of the larger men around her. By mile 3, 2 soldiers had already fallen behind and been picked up by the follow vehicle. Elena maintained a steady rhythm, her breathing controlled, and even. She had always been a strong runner. While she might not have the raw upper body strength of her male counterparts, her cardiovascular fitness was excellent. She finished the run in the top third of the class, crossing the finish line ahead of Morrison and several other men who had questioned her presence the day before. "Not bad for a secretary," she heard Morrison mutter as he bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Elena said nothing. She simply took a drink of water and began stretching to cool down. The marksmanship evaluation took place immediately after breakfast. Each student was given a standard sniper rifle and taken to a range with targets at various distances from 200 to 800 yards. They would fire 10 rounds at each distance, with scoring based on accuracy and grouping. Elena approached the firing line with quiet confidence. This was her element. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, despite being a different model than what she had trained with in her previous assignments. She adjusted the scope, checked the wind flags, and took her position. The first target was at 200 yards. Elena controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger smoothly. The shot broke cleanly, and she watched through the scope as the bullet struck the center of the target. 9 more shots followed, each one placed with precision in a tight group around the bullseye. As the distances increased, Elena's performance remained consistent. At 400 yards, her 10 shots could be covered by a silver dollar. At 600 yards, she maintained sub-minute of angle accuracy. By the time she reached the 800-yard line, a small crowd of instructors had gathered behind the firing line to watch. Elena was aware of the attention but did not let it affect her concentration. 800 yards was a long shot, even for an experienced marksman. The bullet would be in the air for nearly a full second, giving wind and other environmental factors time to affect its trajectory. She took extra time to read the conditions, noting the direction of the wind flags and the heat shimmer rising from the ground. The shot felt perfect as it left the barrel. Elena watched through the scope as the bullet struck the target dead center. The next 9 shots grouped tightly around the first, creating a pattern that would have been impressive at half the distance. When the evaluation was complete and scores were tallied, Elena had achieved the highest marksmanship score in the class. Several of the men who had been making jokes about her presence were suddenly very quiet. Colonel Hayes himself came to speak with her as she was cleaning her rifle. "Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez," he said. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My grandfather taught me, sir. Started when I was 7 years old." "Well, he taught you well. That was some of the finest shooting I've seen from a first-day student." The colonel paused for a moment. "I should warn you, though, the shooting is just the beginning. This course will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Physical endurance, mental toughness, tactical knowledge. Are you prepared for what's coming?" Elena looked him directly in the eye. "Yes, sir. I am." Over the following weeks, the intensity of training increased dramatically. Each day began before dawn with physical training that pushed every student to their limits. Long-distance runs with full packs, obstacle courses designed to test agility and strength, and hand-to-hand combat training were daily requirements. Elena struggled with some aspects of the physical training. During pack marches, she had to work harder than the larger men to maintain the same pace, while carrying equipment that represented a larger percentage of her body weight. But she never fell behind. When others complained about the heat, the distance, or the weight of their gear, Elena remained silent and focused. The academic portion of sniper training was extensive. Students learned about ballistics, weather effects on bullet trajectory, range estimation, camouflage and concealment, fieldcraft, and tactical movement. Elena excelled in these areas, often scoring among the highest on written examinations. But it was during the stalking exercises that Elena began to truly distinguish herself from her classmates. Sniping was not just about shooting accurately. A sniper had to be able to move unseen across open terrain, find and occupy concealed positions, observe targets for extended periods, and extract without being detected. The first stalking exercise took place on a bright Tuesday morning. Students were required to move across 1,200 yards of open desert terrain and get within 200 yards of an observation post manned by instructors. They had to do this without being seen, take a photo of a specific target through their scope, and then extract back to the starting position. Most of the larger students tried to use natural depressions and sparse vegetation for concealment. Elena took a different approach. Instead of trying to avoid open areas, she moved across them so slowly and carefully that she became virtually invisible. She understood that movement, more than anything else, drew the human eye. It took her nearly 4 hours to complete the stalk. Other students finished in half that time, but when the exercise was evaluated, Elena was one of only 3 students who had successfully approached the observation post undetected. The instructors manning the post admitted they never saw her coming. "How did you do that?" asked a fellow student named Jackson, a Navy SEAL who had been among the top performers in most exercises. "I swear you just disappeared into the ground." Elena smiled slightly. "My grandfather taught me to hunt. He always said that patience was more important than speed. If you move like you belong there, most people won't notice you." As the weeks progressed, the exercises became more complex and challenging. Students were required to operate in teams, conducting multi-day field exercises that tested every skill they had learned. Elena was often paired with different team members, and she noticed that the initial skepticism about her abilities was gradually being replaced by respect. During one particularly challenging exercise, Elena and Morrison were paired together for a simulated mission. Their task was to observe and report on activity at a mock enemy compound for 72 hours without being detected. The position they had to occupy was barely large enough for 2 people, and they would have to remain virtually motionless for long periods. Morrison had been one of Elena's harshest critics during the first weeks of training, but as they lay side by side in their concealed position, watching the target area through high-powered optics, he began to see her in a different light. "You know," he whispered during one of their brief rest periods, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you." Elena kept her eyes on the target area. "What changed your mind?" "Watching you work. You don't just shoot well. You think like a sniper. The way you move, the way you observe, the way you plan everything 3 steps ahead. I've never seen anyone pick up the mental side of this job so quickly." Elena nodded but said nothing. She had learned that in her profession, actions spoke louder than words. The halfway point of the training course was marked by the most challenging test yet. Students would be required to demonstrate all of their skills in a comprehensive field exercise. They would have to plan and execute a simulated mission that included infiltration, target observation, long-range shooting, and extraction. Each student would work alone, and failure at any stage would result in immediate dismissal from the program. Elena spent hours planning her approach to the exercise. The target was located in a complex of buildings 800 yards from the nearest concealed position. She would have to move across open terrain in daylight, find a shooting position, engage multiple targets at extended range, and then extract without being caught by the opposing force of instructors acting as enemy soldiers. The night before the exercise, Elena lay in her bunk thinking about her grandfather. He had passed away 2 years earlier, but she could still hear his voice giving her advice about hunting and shooting. "Mija," he would say, "the animal doesn't care how big you are or what other people think about you. The animal only cares about whether you can do the job. Be patient, be smart, and trust your training." The next morning, Elena approached the starting line with quiet confidence. She had trained hard for this moment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. The comprehensive field exercise began at dawn on a crisp October morning. Elena crouched at the starting position, studying the terrain ahead through her binoculars. 800 yards of rolling desert stretched between her and the target complex, with scattered brush, rocky outcroppings, and 2 dry creek beds that might provide concealment routes. The mission parameters were clear. She had to infiltrate to within effective shooting range, observe the target building for specific intelligence requirements, engage 3 separate targets at different ranges, and extract without being detected by the roving patrols of instructors who would be hunting for students throughout the exercise area. Elena had chosen her route carefully during the planning phase. Instead of taking the most direct path, she would use the northern creek bed to approach within 400 yards, then move across open ground to a rocky position that would give her clear fields of fire to all 3 target areas. The route was longer, but it offered better concealment opportunities. She began her infiltration by moving slowly along the creek bed, using the natural depression to stay below the sight lines of the observation posts she knew were positioned around the exercise area. Progress was deliberately slow. Elena understood that rushing would only lead to mistakes, and mistakes in sniper training meant failure. After 90 minutes of careful movement, she reached the point where she would have to leave the creek bed and cross open ground. Elena spent 20 minutes observing the area, timing the movements of the patrol that she could see in the distance, and planning her next phase of movement. The crossing took another hour. Elena moved in short bounds, covering only 10 or 15 yards at a time, before freezing in place and scanning for threats. Her camouflage was perfect, blending her outline with the natural vegetation and rock formations. To any observer more than 100 yards away, she would appear to be just another shadow on the landscape. By mid-morning, Elena had reached her chosen shooting position among a cluster of boulders that provided both concealment and a stable firing platform. She carefully arranged her equipment, setting up her rifle and spotting scope with precise attention to detail. Everything had to be perfect for what came next. The first target appeared at exactly 10:30, as scheduled in the exercise plan. A figure emerged from the main building and began walking toward a vehicle parked 300 yards from Elena's position. This was her first engagement, and it had to be a clean hit to receive full points for the exercise. Elena settled behind her rifle and began her shooting sequence. She estimated the range using the mil-dot reticle in her scope, checked the wind flags visible in her field of view, and made the necessary adjustments to her scope settings. The target was moving slowly but steadily, requiring her to calculate lead time and trajectory simultaneously. She controlled her breathing, finding her natural respiratory pause, and began applying pressure to the trigger. The shot broke cleanly, and Elena watched through her scope as the paint round struck the target squarely in the center of mass. 1 down, 2 to go. The second target was more challenging. At 500 yards, a figure would appear in a second-story window for only 30 seconds. Elena had to be ready the moment the target became visible, as there would be no time for extended preparation. She shifted her position slightly to get a better angle on the target building and reset her scope for the longer range. At exactly 11:15, the window opened and her target appeared. Elena had already calculated the necessary scope adjustments and wind corrections. Her crosshairs settled on the target, and her second shot flew true, marking another direct hit. The third target was the most difficult of all. At 700 yards, a figure would move from one building to another, crossing an open area that would be visible from Elena's position for less than 20 seconds. This was a test of her ability to engage moving targets at extended range under time pressure. Elena prepared for this shot with extra care. 700 yards was near the maximum effective range for the rifle she was using, and any error in calculation could result in a miss. She studied the area where the target would appear, noting the wind conditions and the exact path the figure would take. At noon, her target began to move. Elena tracked the figure smoothly through her scope, calculating the lead necessary to intercept the target at the center of the open area. Her trigger press was perfectly timed, and the paint round struck home just as the target reached the most exposed portion of the crossing. 3 targets, 3 hits. Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before beginning the most dangerous part of the exercise. Now she had to extract from her position and return to the starting point without being detected by the opposing force that would be actively searching for her. The extraction was where many students failed the exercise. After the shooting portion, it was tempting to rush back to safety. But Elena knew that the instructors would be expecting this. They would have repositioned their patrols to cover the most likely escape routes, and anyone who tried to move quickly would probably be caught. Elena decided to do something unexpected. Instead of beginning her extraction immediately, she remained in her shooting position for another hour. Watching the movements of the search teams through her scope, she noted their patrol patterns and timing, looking for gaps in their coverage that she could exploit. By early afternoon, Elena had identified her opportunity. The patrol teams were focusing their search on the areas between her position and the extraction point, but they were not watching the flanks as carefully. Elena planned a route that would take her well to the east of the direct path, adding nearly 2 miles to her journey but avoiding the areas of heaviest patrol activity. The extraction took the rest of the afternoon. Elena moved with the same patience and care she had shown during the infiltration, never rushing, always thinking 3 moves ahead. She used every piece of cover available, sometimes spending 30 minutes to move only 50 yards when the terrain required it. As the sun began to set, Elena finally approached the extraction point. She had been moving for nearly 10 hours, covering a total distance of more than 6 miles, and engaging 3 targets with perfect accuracy. But the exercise was not complete until she reached the designated safe area without being detected. The final 100 yards were the most dangerous. The area around the extraction point was relatively open, offering little concealment. Elena knew that the instructors would have positioned observers to watch this area carefully. Anyone who had made it this far could still fail if they became careless in the final moments. Elena spent 40 minutes studying the final approach, looking for any sign of the observers she knew were there. Finally, she spotted a slight glint of light from a scope lens positioned in a tree line to her left. She adjusted her route to stay in the observer's blind spot and began her final movement. She crossed the last 100 yards on her belly, moving inches at a time across the open ground. It took nearly an hour, but Elena finally reached the extraction point without being detected. As she raised her hand to signal completion of the exercise, Colonel Hayes emerged from a concealed position less than 50 yards away. "Outstanding work, Rodriguez," he said with obvious admiration. "That was a textbook infiltration and extraction. Your shooting was perfect, and your field craft was exceptional. You just completed one of the finest individual performances I've seen in 15 years of running this exercise." Elena stood and dusted off her uniform. "Thank you, sir. How did you know we had an observer in that tree line?" "Scope reflection, sir. Very brief, but visible when the sun hit it at the right angle." "The prominence." 17-7. "The scope reflection, sir. Very brief but visible." Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly. "Most students never spot that position. We've had it there for years, and maybe 1 or 2 students per class ever notice it. You have excellent observation skills." Word of Elena's performance on the comprehensive exercise spread quickly through the class. Students who had initially dismissed her as a novelty began to see her as a serious competitor. Some of the men who had been most vocal in their skepticism became her strongest supporters. "I'll admit it," Morrison said to a group of students that evening. "I was completely wrong about Rodriguez. She's not just keeping up with us. She's setting the standard for the rest of us to follow." Jackson, the Navy SEAL, agreed. "She thinks differently than the rest of us. While we're trying to use brute force to solve problems, she's finding elegant solutions that work better. I've learned more about fieldcraft watching her than I did in my first 5 years as a SEAL." Elena appreciated the recognition, but she remained focused on the challenges ahead. The comprehensive exercise marked the halfway point of the course. But the second half would be even more demanding. The instructors would push the remaining students to their absolute limits, and only the very best would make it to graduation. The advanced phase of training introduced new elements that tested students in ways they had not experienced before. Night operations became routine, requiring students to navigate and shoot accurately in complete darkness using only night vision equipment. Combat scenarios became more complex, often involving multiple team members working together to accomplish complicated missions. Elena continued to excel in these advanced exercises. Her small size, which had initially been seen as a disadvantage, actually proved beneficial in many situations. She could hide in positions that larger students could not use. She could move through confined spaces more easily. And her lower profile made her harder to spot during stalking exercises. But it was during the stress shooting evaluation that Elena truly distinguished herself from her classmates. This exercise was designed to test a sniper's ability to make accurate shots under extreme psychological pressure. Students were required to complete a grueling physical course, then immediately engage multiple targets at various ranges, while their heart rate was still elevated and their breathing was labored. The physical course began with a 100-yard sprint carrying full combat gear. This was followed by a series of obstacles designed to exhaust the students, including rope climbs, wall climbs, and crawling through confined spaces. The entire course had to be completed in under 10 minutes, and students who failed to meet this standard were immediately disqualified. Elena completed the course in 8 minutes and 43 seconds, finishing in the top quarter of the class despite being one of the smallest students. But the real test came next. Immediately after completing the obstacle course, each student was led to a shooting position, where 5 targets were arranged at ranges from 200 to 600 yards. They had exactly 60 seconds to engage all 5 targets, and every shot had to be a hit to pass the exercise. Most students struggled with this evaluation. After the intense physical exertion, their hands were shaking, their breathing was rapid and uncontrolled, and their vision was affected by fatigue. Several students who had been performing well throughout the course failed this single exercise and were eliminated from the program. Elena approached the firing line with her heart pounding and sweat dripping into her eyes. But as she settled behind her rifle, years of training and natural instinct took over. She controlled her breathing despite the physical stress, steadied her aim despite the trembling in her muscles, and began engaging the targets with methodical precision. The first target fell at 200 yards, the second at 300. Elena worked systematically from near to far, taking each shot with deliberate care despite the time pressure. With 15 seconds remaining, she engaged the final target at 600 yards, watching through her scope as the bullet found its mark. 5 targets, 5 hits, completed with 3 seconds to spare. Colonel Hayes approached Elena as she was securing her rifle after the exercise. "Rodriguez, I need to ask you something. Have you ever considered what you want to do after you complete this course?" Elena looked up at him, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I plan to return to my unit and serve as a designated marksman, sir. What would you think about staying here as an instructor? We're always looking for the best graduates to help train the next generation of snipers. Your performance throughout this course has been exceptional, and I think you have a lot to offer future students." Elena was surprised by the offer. Becoming an instructor at sniper school was considered one of the highest honors in the marksman community. Only the very best graduates were ever invited to stay. "I'm honored by the offer, sir, but I think I need to gain more operational experience before I could effectively teach others." Colonel Hayes nodded. "That's exactly the kind of mature thinking I would expect from you. The offer will remain open. Consider it as you move forward in your career." As the course entered its final month, the training became even more intensive. Students were required to complete a series of culminating exercises that would test everything they had learned over the previous 5 months. These exercises were conducted under conditions that closely mimicked actual combat operations, with realistic scenarios and genuine consequences for failure. Elena continued to perform at the highest level. Her shooting scores remained consistently excellent. Her fieldcraft had improved to the point where even the instructors sometimes had difficulty spotting her during stalking exercises. Most importantly, she had gained the complete respect of her classmates and instructors. The transformation in how others viewed Elena was remarkable. The same men who had mocked her arrival at the school now spoke of her with genuine admiration. They had seen her overcome every challenge, excel in every area, and maintain her professionalism in the face of initial skepticism and doubt. "You know what I respect most about Rodriguez?" Jackson said to Morrison one evening as they cleaned their equipment after a long day of training. "She never complained, never made excuses, never asked for special treatment. She just showed up every day and did the work better than anyone else." Morrison nodded in agreement. "I learned something important from watching her. All those assumptions I made about who could be a good sniper were just that, assumptions. She's proven that what matters is skill, intelligence, and dedication, not size or gender. Elena was aware of the change in attitude around her, but she remained focused on the goal that had brought her to sniper school in the first place. She wanted to be the best marksman she could be, not to prove a point to others, but to honor the training her grandfather had given her and to serve her country with distinction. The final weeks of training passed quickly. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate mastery of the sniper's craft. Elena met every challenge with the same quiet competence she had shown since her first day at the school. As graduation approached, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months earlier, she had arrived at Camp Thunder as an unknown quantity, facing skepticism and doubt from almost everyone around her. Now she was recognized as one of the finest students ever to complete the advanced sniper training course. But the real test of her training would come later, in operational environments where her skills would be put to use in defense of her country and her fellow soldiers. Elena looked forward to that challenge with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through every obstacle at sniper school. The final examination of Advanced Sniper Training School was unlike anything the students had faced before. It was designed to be the ultimate test of every skill they had learned over the past 6 months. The exercise would take place over 4 days and 3 nights in terrain that simulated a hostile combat environment. Elena stood with the remaining 19 students who had made it to this final stage. Nearly half of the original class had been eliminated along the way, unable to meet the demanding standards required of military snipers. Those who remained represented the best marksmen from every branch of the armed forces. Colonel Hayes addressed the group in the pre-dawn darkness of the final Monday morning. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your graduation exercise. You will be operating independently in teams of 2, conducting multiple missions that will test every aspect of your training. Your performance over the next 4 days will determine whether you graduate from this course and earn the right to call yourself a military sniper." Elena had been paired with Jackson for the final exercise. Over the months of training, she had developed a strong working relationship with the Navy SEAL. Their complementary skills made them an effective team, and both had consistently performed at the top of their class. "The scenario is as follows," Colonel Hayes continued. "You are operating in enemy territory. Your mission is to conduct reconnaissance, gather intelligence, and eliminate high-value targets as opportunities present themselves. You will face opposition forces, challenging weather conditions, and limited resources. Failure to complete your assigned tasks will result in failure of the entire course." Elena and Jackson received their specific mission briefing in a secure tent away from the other teams. Their assignment was complex and demanding. They would have to infiltrate deep into the exercise area, establish an observation post overlooking a simulated enemy command center, gather intelligence on enemy movements for 48 hours, and then eliminate 3 specific high-value targets before extracting to safety. "This is going to be tough," Jackson said as they studied their mission maps. "We're going in deeper than any other team, and we have more targets to eliminate. They're really testing us." Elena nodded, already visualizing their approach routes and potential shooting positions. "The good news is that being farther out means fewer opposing forces to deal with during our infiltration. If we can get in position undetected, we should be able to complete our missions without too much interference." They spent the rest of the morning planning their operation in detail. Route selection, equipment requirements, contingency plans for various scenarios, and coordination procedures were all carefully considered. Elena insisted on having backup plans for every phase of the mission, a habit that had served her well throughout training. The infiltration began at nightfall. Elena and Jackson moved across the rough terrain with practiced stealth, using night vision equipment to navigate while avoiding the patrol routes of the opposing force. Progress was slow but steady as they covered the 8 miles to their target area. By dawn, they had reached the ridgeline that overlooked their objective. The simulated enemy command center was located in a valley below, consisting of several buildings and communication equipment. Elena and Jackson spent the morning hours establishing their observation post in a concealed position among the rocks and sparse vegetation of the ridge. The observation post had to be perfect. They would be living in this position for the next 2 days, maintaining constant surveillance, while remaining completely hidden from enemy forces. Elena used her expert knowledge of camouflage and concealment to create a hide that was virtually undetectable from any angle. "This is incredible work," Jackson whispered, as he examined Elena's camouflage techniques. "I can barely see this position from 10 feet away, and I helped build it." Jackson whispered. "I can build it." Elena smiled slightly. "My grandfather always said that the best hunting blind is the one that animals walk right past without noticing. Same principle applies here." Over the next 48 hours, Elena and Jackson maintained continuous surveillance of the target area, documenting enemy activities, counting personnel, and noting patterns of movement. The intelligence requirements for their mission were extensive, requiring careful observation and detailed record-keeping. Elena proved to be exceptionally skilled at this type of work. Her natural patience and attention to detail made her an ideal observer. She could remain motionless for hours at a time, watching for subtle changes in activity patterns that might reveal important information about enemy operations. On the second day of observation, Elena noticed something that Jackson had missed. "Look at the timing of the radio transmissions from the command building," she whispered, pointing to her logbook where she had been tracking communication activity. "Every day at 14:30 hours, there's a burst transmission that lasts exactly 90 seconds. That's when they're sending their daily reports to higher headquarters." Jackson studied her notes and realized she was right. "That's excellent observation. If this were a real operation, that information could be used to intercept their communications or time an attack for maximum effect." The intelligence gathering phase of their mission was completed successfully, but the real challenge was yet to come. They now had to eliminate 3 specific targets while avoiding detection by the increasingly alert opposing force. The instructors had been steadily increasing the pressure on all teams, making movement more dangerous and shooting opportunities more difficult to find. The first target was a simulated enemy commander who appeared at predictable times each day to inspect the guard posts around the compound. Elena had studied his movement patterns during their observation period and identified a location where he would be vulnerable to long-range engagement. The shot would have to be made at a range of nearly 700 yards, with the target visible for less than 30 seconds. Elena positioned herself carefully, using a natural rest among the rocks to steady her rifle. She had calculated all the environmental factors that could affect the bullet's trajectory, including wind speed, temperature, and humidity. When the target appeared right on schedule, Elena was ready. Her crosshairs settled on the figure as he moved across the open area between 2 buildings. The shot broke cleanly, and Elena watched through her scope as the paint round struck the target dead center. 1 down, 2 to go. The second target presented a different challenge. This figure appeared in various locations around the compound at irregular times, making it impossible to predict when and where he would be vulnerable. Elena and Jackson would have to remain alert and ready to take the shot whenever the opportunity presented itself. They waited for nearly 6 hours before their chance came. The target appeared unexpectedly at a window in the main command building, visible for perhaps 15 seconds. Elena had to quickly estimate the range, adjust her scope, and take the shot before the opportunity disappeared. The hasty shot was more difficult than the carefully planned first engagement, but Elena's training and natural ability served her well. The paint round found its mark just as the target moved back into the building. 2 down, 1 to go. The third target was the most challenging of all. Intelligence indicated that this individual only appeared at night, during irregular security checks of the compound perimeter. Elena and Jackson would have to engage this target in darkness using night vision equipment, adding another layer of complexity to an already difficult shot. They spent the entire third night waiting for their opportunity. At nearly 3 in the morning, their target finally appeared, moving along a fence line at the edge of the compound. The range was over 600 yards, and the target was moving steadily, requiring Elena to calculate lead time while shooting through night vision optics. Elena settled behind her rifle and began tracking the moving figure through her night vision scope. The image was green and grainy, making precise aim more difficult than daylight shooting. She had to trust her training and experience as she led the target and pressed the trigger. The shot felt good as it broke, but in the darkness and at extended range, Elena could not immediately confirm the hit. She and Jackson waited tensely for several minutes before their radio crackled with a transmission from the exercise controllers. Team 7. Confirm elimination of Target 3. Direct hit at 03:15 hours. Elena and Jackson looked at each other with relief and satisfaction. All 3 targets had been successfully eliminated. Now they had to extract from their position and return to the designated safe area before the exercise concluded. The extraction proved to be the most dangerous part of the entire mission. Word of the successful eliminations had reached the opposing force, and they had increased their patrol activities throughout the area. Elena and Jackson would have to move carefully to avoid being captured during their return journey. They began their extraction in the early morning hours of the 4th day, moving slowly and carefully through terrain that was now crawling with search teams. Elena's expertise in stalking and concealment proved invaluable as they navigated through areas where detection seemed almost inevitable. At one point, they had to remain motionless for over an hour while an enemy patrol passed within 20 yards of their position. Elena's camouflage techniques kept them hidden despite the close scrutiny of the search team. "I don't know how you do it," Jackson whispered after the patrol had moved on. "That guy was staring right at us for at least 5 minutes. He was looking for people," Elena replied quietly. "I made sure we looked like part of the landscape instead." They finally reached the extraction point late in the afternoon of the 4th day, completing one of the most challenging missions ever assigned to students in the advanced sniper course. Their performance had been flawless, accomplishing every objective while avoiding detection by the opposing force. Colonel Hayes was waiting at the extraction point to debrief their mission. "Outstanding work, both of you," he said with obvious satisfaction. "This was a graduate-level mission, and you executed it with precision and professionalism. Rodriguez, your fieldcraft throughout this exercise has been exceptional. Jackson, your tactical planning was excellent." Elena felt a sense of deep satisfaction as she realized that she had successfully completed the most demanding training course in the military. 6 months of grueling preparation had led to this moment, and she had met every challenge along the way. That evening, the final graduation ceremony took place in the same briefing room where Elena had first met her classmates 6 months earlier. 19 students had successfully completed the course out of the original 32 who had started. Elena was not only among the graduates, but she had achieved the highest overall scores in the class. Colonel Hayes addressed the graduating class with obvious pride. "You are now qualified military snipers. Among the elite marksmen of the world, you have earned the right to wear the sniper badge, and more importantly, you have earned the trust of your fellow soldiers who will depend on your skills in combat." When Elena's name was called to receive her graduation certificate and sniper badge, the applause from her classmates was loud and sustained. These men who had initially questioned her presence now recognized her as the finest sniper in the class. Morrison, who had been her harshest critic on the first day, was among the loudest in his applause. After the ceremony, he approached Elena with an expression of genuine respect and admiration. "Rodriguez, I owe you more than just an apology," he said. "I learned something important from watching you over these past 6 months. You showed me that excellence comes from skill, dedication, and character, not from fitting some preconceived image of what a sniper should look like." Elena shook his hand warmly. "We all learned from each other, Morrison. That's what made this such a strong class." Jackson joined them, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate their graduation. "Here's to the finest sniper I've ever worked with," he said, raising his glass toward Elena. "It's been an honor to train alongside you." Colonel Hayes approached the group with an envelope in his hand. "Rodriguez, I have something for you," he said. "These are your orders for your next assignment." Elena opened the envelope and read the contents with growing excitement. She was being assigned to a special operations unit that conducted high-risk missions in support of national security objectives. It was exactly the kind of assignment she had hoped for when she first applied for sniper training. "This is a tremendous opportunity," Colonel Hayes said. "This unit only accepts the very best snipers from all branches of the military. Your performance in this course has earned you a spot among the elite of the elite." Elena looked around at her classmates, many of whom had become close friends during their months of training together. She realized that this was just the beginning of her journey as a military sniper. The skills she had learned and refined at the Advanced Sniper Training School would serve her well in the challenges that lay ahead. As the evening celebration continued, Elena stepped outside to look up at the stars in the clear desert sky. She thought about her grandfather, who had started her on this path so many years ago with his patient teaching and encouragement. She wished he could be here to see how far she had come. "Thank you, abuelo," she whispered to the night sky. "I hope I made you proud." The next morning, Elena packed her gear for the last time at Camp Thunder. Her 6 months of training had transformed her from a skilled marksman into an elite military sniper. More importantly, she had proven to herself and others that determination and skill could overcome any obstacle. As her transport arrived to take her to her new assignment, Elena took one last look at the training facility that had been her home for half a year. She had arrived here as an unknown quantity, facing skepticism and doubt from almost everyone around her. She was leaving as the distinguished graduate of one of the military's most demanding courses. The men who had once mocked her presence now spoke of her with the highest respect. They had learned, as Elena herself had always known, that a true sniper was defined not by appearance or assumptions, but by skill, intelligence, and the ability to perform under pressure. Elena climbed into the transport vehicle with her head held high. She was ready for whatever challenges awaited her in her new assignment. She had proven herself capable of meeting any standard, overcoming any obstacle, and exceeding any expectation. As the vehicle pulled away from Camp Thunder, Elena smiled to herself. She had accomplished something that few people ever achieve. She had taken her natural talents, refined them through dedicated training, and earned her place among the very best in her profession. The skeptics had been silenced not by arguments or protests, but by consistent demonstration of superior ability. Elena had let her actions speak for themselves, and they had spoken with unmistakable clarity. She was a sniper, one of the finest ever trained, and she was ready to serve her country with distinction. The little girl who had learned to shoot from her grandfather in the Texas Hill Country had grown into a warrior worthy of the trust placed in her by her fellow soldiers. Elena Rodriguez, distinguished graduate of Advanced Sniper Training School, was heading into the next chapter of her military career with confidence, skill, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you have given your very best effort to an important calling. The road ahead would bring new challenges, new missions, and new opportunities to demonstrate the skills she had worked so hard to develop. Elena looked forward to each of them with the same determination that had carried her through 6 months of the most demanding training the military could provide. She was ready for whatever came next.